Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. Today, we have one of our naturopathic doctors, Dr. Lauryn, with us. She is in Kingston and, of course, as usual, practices virtually across Ontario. So we are going to dive in today, get to know Lauryn a little bit, get to know what makes her tick, what she loves doing, and we'll go from there. So, Lauryn, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. So I've been practicing for about a year. We started talking, I took your course in fourth year of school and then actually ended up doing like a little side project for you while studying.
I made that project.
Whatever.
Fun facts about me. When I see something I figure out how to have it happen. So I was like, I need this done. Please come work. So that makes me if you're a good person. So as naturopathic doctors in Ontario, we really emphasize a lot on, naturopathic doctors on something called informed consent. So we went through every supplement that we carry and it's like, here's what it's good for. And here's how long you take it. And because there are, according to the research, very prescribed ways to go through it. So I made Lauryn do that whole thing. And now our doctors ask for it about every 2 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, I'll get that to you. But no, that's a fun fact. People get to know behind the scenes. I made a make work project to see if you were a good person. And then you got offered a job. So clearly I like Lauryn.
Oh my gosh, I'm here for it. It worked out okay. We're good. It was worth it.
Yeah. So then diving into practice over the last year, or I guess getting into practice, like what made you be a naturopathic doctor? What was the thing that was like, yeah, let's do this?
Yeah. So I never even knew what naturopathic medicine was. It's not something that I graduated university being like, this is what I want to do. I actually was on the complete other side that I thought I wanted to go medical doctor route. And I got a job right after graduation working at a hospital back home and was studying for my MCAT and just working there, kind of seeing the environment about how all that kind of played out and kind of came to this crossroads. And I remember talking to my boyfriend at the time, now husband, being like, I don't know what to do because I love medicine and I love getting to work with people. But the way that it was designed and kind of set up, I was like, I just don't see myself fitting into this kind of layout of it.
It was psychiatry, right?
Yeah, I was in psychiatry. So I was kind of in between. I was like the liaison between our inpatient unit and kind of that transition kind of outside in the community and kind of how to get supported and once kind of discharged. So kind of was like, I don't know how to navigate this. And it was one of the psychiatrists there actually that said, have you thought about naturopathic medicine? Which was really, really, really cool. So kind of went home, did a bunch of research, did a bunch of kind of looking into it. And I was like, yeah, this sounds like everything that I love. Always been an athlete and kind of really respected that side of like that lifestyle and kind of taking care of yourself that way and kind of integrating kind of the best of both worlds and connecting the dots that way. I was like, yeah, let's do it.
What did you play? What sports did you play?
Predominantly soccer and volleyball. Yeah.
That's why I like these because I learned things about my stuff too. I'm like, what did you do with your blood?
The gymnastics, though.
Lauryn recently did a splits reel. So we all know very well how limber Lauryn is. If you want a doctor to support you with your flexibility and recovery, she's your girl.
Yeah. And then went to CCM like the next summer and never looked back really since.
Cool. So how did that working in psychiatry, did that inform what types of patients you wanted to work with? Or was that just kind of that psychiatrist was the stepping stone? You know what I mean? Like you needed to work in that position to have your eyes open to a different profession. Like walk me through that.
Yeah, I think it was more so that line. It's not so much like the specialty itself. It was more so like kind of that different perspective about what else can care look like beyond that kind of paradigm. I'm very grateful for that experience. That being said, it was a very heavy position and we navigated a lot of scenarios that outside of that field, it was more so like, what can a positive healthcare experience look like? What can a positive engagement with a person kind of looking for support look like? And kind of that relationship between doctor and patient outside of that roster for the day.
So then give people an idea, like what does that look like in the context of your office now? Because this is the thing. So I love naturopathic medicine. Love it. Clearly open multiple clinics in it. Will continue to. Like, I think naturopathic medicine is absolutely positioned to change the world. But one of the obstacles that people face in finding a naturopath is not just how that person practices, which is confusing, which is why so many people love coming to Advanced Women's Health, because they know what they're going to expect. They're going to come talk to a practitioner who has an evidence-informed lens, and then they're going to get lab work. They're going to get a proper assessment. They're going to know that all of their stuff is deeply uncovered. They're going to get a reasonable amount of supplements. And like, they know that someone's going to work with their price point. They have that expectation. It's that baseline of like, we give a shit. We will look deeply into your care, right? We will definitely make sure you have the proper assessments. We will coordinate with whatever practitioner we need to make sure you get that care. So we're kind of standardizing that naturopathic experience. But within that, when you're trying to choose a practitioner at Advanced Women's Health, people are always like, okay, how do I choose this? What does this look like? Which is part of why we're doing this. We want people to get to know the personality and the experience of what each practitioner brings to the table, right? Because Lauryn and I are very different. We're very different. And so from that space, you're going to have people that love working with you and resonate with you. And they would come to me and be like, she is harsh, and vice versa, right? And so from that space, I think that's why I like to do these episodes and these podcasts and video as well as we're recording here, is so that people get to know what that looks like with each of our practitioners. So give me kind of that overview of what you love to bring into your consult room that you think is really important.
For me, it's building that relationship with the individual, I think, and just like creating that warm environment from the get-go is really important to me, and getting to know the person outside of what their symptoms are.
Yeah.
I think too, which is huge, and trying to be like, you know what, I get that. Because when you fill out an intake form, there's a lot of information on there. It's very medical and this is what I'm here for, which is awesome. But then outside of that, I find every patient has a story. And that plays a big role into where they're at today and what they're looking to get and help resolve. And I think that's a big part of what that first visit is like, okay, yeah, but then really trying to connect on that deeper level, be like, okay, outside of you being here, I'm a doctor, you're on that side of things, like, and just kind of eliminating those titles in general. And I'll say to patients sometimes like, don't even call me Dr. Dingle, or don't even call me, like, just call me Lauryn, or this is kind of that partner relationship. It's not, you're a doctor.
Yeah. There's no hierarchy.
Yeah. Which is very different than a lot of times some of those other interactions that they've had with practitioners. And at the same time, like, if we're talking about a plan or this or that, I'll be like, I'm very easygoing in the sense that if something doesn't resonate, if I'm talking and you're kind of, I don't understand like how she's connecting these dots or these puzzles, share that feedback with me. Because when you feel informed about your body and you leave here and your husband or your mom or someone's asking you, why are you taking these supplements? You're able to explain that to them on a different level. Also a little informal at times in visits where it's like, if you can crack a few jokes, or like, I'll say that too. I was like, I'm not a stuffy person.
You don't again, you must pick that.
So I think one of my patients, I accidentally let a swear word slip, and she was like, I knew I was going to like you as soon as you said the F-bomb.
But it's true, right? It's one of those things that sometimes it's those moments that create the opportunity for a patient to let their guard down. Because as you said, and you said it perfectly, and I think this is so important, patients can over-identify with their illness when they're in our offices. And if someone says, okay, like this is, I'm going to use endometriosis as an example. I have endo. This is my endo. These are my endo symptoms. That's an identification. It's mine. You're identifying with it, right? And if they identify with it such that they can't picture life without it, and they can't picture what their story and that evolution is going to look like without those symptoms, it's really hard to move your way out of it. And it's a very subconscious conversation, but it's so true. So when you get to know that patient's story and you get to know deeply what makes them tick and what this is holding them back from and what their goals are and all of those pieces, you can then reinsert those pieces back into their story in a positive way, right? I talk about this all the time. Like, I don't think it's anyone's surprise. I treat a ton of weight loss resistance. I treat a lot of skin stuff. I treat a lot of endometriosis. I treat a lot of these conditions. And so I always say to someone, well, okay, if part of the story is that you're struggling in confidence at work to set boundaries. And part of that is because you don't know when you're going to take time off and when you're not because of the amount of pain that you're in. And so you don't want to stir things up because you should just be grateful that you have a flexible job. Okay, well, now that your pain's better, what does it look like? You know what I mean? What does that relationship look like to set those boundaries? And how are you going to do that in a positive way? But you need to know the patient's story to know that they're not setting the boundaries because of the pain. You need to know that the patient in front of you is not dating because they're not confident in their body, right? And so we can see on a chart, patient is not married, you know what I mean? Not trying to conceive, not sexually active. We can see those things on a chart. But the why behind it, some people do not want to be married. They do not want to be in a relationship and they do not want to be sexually active. Slow clap for your bad selves. Some people want those things, but avoid them because of how they feel in their body or because of their pain or whatever that looks like. And so when you understand that story and you understand why those pieces are happening and you feel safe to share that, we can then help you recreate a story based on an image of health. And I think that's one of the most important gifts we can give as naturopathic doctors, because we have the time to help to reframe those models. But for so many of you, if you reflect right now, you don't even picture what your life looks like without the illness, without the disease, without the pain, without the symptom. And so it's really hard to get there unless you have a guide who's on that path with you, who's helping to paint what that picture could look like.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. Exactly. And I think that's just such a different experience, which is, I know, kind of what we talk about as a clinic in general, such a different experience of what women's health can look like.
Totally.
And that's, yeah.
So then let's dive in. What do you love to treat? What's your thing? Like, if you could wake up all day, every day and have these things in practice, what would it be? Because Lauryn and I always joke on the back end, she walked into a very complex healthcare practice because a lot of my patients and a lot of people who are referred to me see Lauryn. So she doesn't have an easy life. So what do you love to treat?
Yeah. I love reproductive kind of health conditions, like very much like the PCOS, PMS, PMDD, fertility, like get so excited about all of that. And I think like coming into practice, that's where I was, yes, 100%. But then by joining a full practice and kind of experiencing a lot of other things, I think you kind of like you do just get passionate about like weight loss resistance. I very much enjoy supporting people kind of through that and empowering about their bodies and helping them feel like their bodies are responding the way that they want again. And that's just a really empowering shift to see. But I think my heart is still kind of with those reproductive health conditions and diving deeper and learning more intricacies and learning from you too, like different angles to take with that and how to be a better practitioner and supporting individuals through that journey.
And I think it's so interesting, right? Because when we talk about women's health, so many people think they're coming in to treat reproductive health, but they end up having to treat the immune system and the liver and like all of those complex, intricate parts. Because as much as women's health has so much to do with the reproductive tract, all of those conditions that you just listed, right? They can be hormonal imbalances. They can be insulin and blood sugar related. They can be immunologically based. Like there's all of those little nuances and influences. So from those pieces, what do you find yourself gravitating towards the most? Like what's the thing that unifies them that you love doing?
I think it's the insulin piece and the blood sugar regulation, but also the gut health piece. I think it's just so fascinating in itself on how much it relates to everything else in the body. I would say those are the two big ones that I see, like insulin and then gut health, and like connecting those pieces that if we can help support that, how much of a shift you can get with everything else. And even when patients come in, they're like, I want to test my hormones. I want to test my hormones. That conversation always coming back to insulin a lot of times and talking about the sex hormones as a secondary axis. And that's just a really cool conversation to have because they're like, oh, I didn't even realize how much it's related to everything else.
Okay, so explain that because you just said sex hormones as a secondary axis. Lauryn just spoke doctor. So walk me through what that conversation looks like with patients because I know what you're saying, but the people on the other side of the mic are like, this sounds interesting, and I don't know what she just said. So explain.
Yeah, when we talk about insulin resistance, insulin being a hormone itself, insulin can impact hormones like follicle stimulating hormone, luteinizing hormone.
What are those?
Yeah, those are hormones from our brain. We do
those all day. So for everyone listening, it's really hard to switch your brain when you're looking at the same face. So like if the girls were talking to me on our lunchtime calls and they were like, insulin interacts with the communication between your brain and your ovaries and blah, 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 blah. I would be like, yeah, okay, cool, right? Because we all talk to doctors all day long, but I want you to break this down, like from the how, because we haven't actually had the conversation yet on this. So I would love for us to do that. Let's talk about how the brain communicates to the ovaries, how that creates our cycle. And then from that space, what are all of the influences that can make your cycle change, whether that's change in quality, like heavy, short, those types of things, and change from a length perspective. Like we've talked about discharge changes and those types of things, but I want to go into the brain piece because again, I think so many of our patients forget that all of the communication, whether you have a period or not, doesn't actually have to do with the lining of your uterus. The lining of your uterus is responding and your brain is dictating that communication, right? So FSH is the hormone that the follicle, right? So it's stimulating an egg follicle to develop. So that's what's happening in the first half of your cycle. And so then we have other changes. So walk us through from that place in terms of what the brain is communicating down throughout the course of our cycle. And then we'll get into what influences it, because I think this is such an important conversation.
Yeah. So that first part of the cycle, it does start in the brain, and the brain is responsible for sending those hormones to the ovary. Like it's the messenger to the ovary to say, hey, how are we going to develop your eggs? How do those follicles, the hormones that they make, and kind of throughout that cycle and preparing for a potential ovulation and pregnancy. But really, it's that initial kind of messenger, those hormones in the brain that can then therefore dictate what's happening in the ovaries. And when we look at kind of outside influences, sometimes we'll see changes from those hormones to the brain, or that signal from the brain to the ovaries. And that's where we talk about insulin, we talk about inflammation, we talk about immune system changes, because that'll impact how that mechanism and that communication's happening. And then secondary to that, so then, okay, we have follicle stimulating hormone, essentially your brain telling your follicles in your ovaries kind of how to develop. They start growing, that follicle starts making estrogen. And we know that's therefore then again going to feed back to the brain to send a second hormone. And that second hormone, luteinizing hormone, is what then goes back to the ovary, to the follicle, to kind of help support that essentially ejection.
And that's what people are measuring. So like when you hear about your people's peeing on sticks and saying, I ovulated, they're measuring that luteinizing hormone, that what we call an LH surge. And so that's the communication from your brain to your ovaries. So you can imagine if you're not getting one of those positives, if you're not ovulating, then our job as doctors is to say, okay, like why? Which that's when we're talking primary axis, secondary. It's like primary is how that brain is communicating. Is it saying let's ovulate or not? Because the secondary is your body responding after ovulation. So walk us through kind of what hormone shifts we expect to see after ovulation.
Yeah. So after ovulation, you're kind of that egg kind of hopes, depending on what's going to happen, your body essentially prepares for potential fertilization or implantation. But when your body releases that egg from that follicle, turns into something called the corpus luteum, and that starts making progesterone. So we start to see that when people talk about kind of confirming ovulation, or because sometimes what can happen is you can get a positive LH. So when you use that ovulation predictor strip and you get a positive LH strip, we always talk about it predicting ovulation. And then we kind of have that conversation about confirming ovulation. And what we're looking for to confirm ovulation is measuring progesterone in the bloodstream, because once you ovulate, it's that follicle that starts making progesterone. And that's where that changes in that second half of the cycle.
Yeah. And then when we're looking at, okay, so now we know that the first part of the cycle, your brain screams at your ovaries, says, hey, I'll follow through, make some estrogen. Then we get ovulation. Then we make estrogen and progesterone. We measure progesterone to confirm ovulation. In that second half, you can then understand that if we have inflammation coming in, we have insulin coming in, if we have glucose coming in, all of these things Lauryn was talking about, then we can have these really significant changes to the amount of hormone we produce. So yes, we can measure your hormones and say, okay, it's high or it's low, but that doesn't actually tell us why. And that's the most important question in our office at all times is why.
And I think that's where it's like sometimes taking that step back, because there's always like this big conversation about, I want to balance my hormones, and it's everywhere. We're surrounded by it on social media too. And I can kind of bring it back to that why, but why are hormones kind of off to begin with? Is it insulin? Is it inflammation? Is it the immune system? Is it all of those other things that when you talk about foundations of health, and I don't know, it's probably been covered on this podcast or not, but
it'll be covered 12 times and probably 50 by the end of it. But that's because it's the most important thing that you could ever understand, right? Is that health is not that complicated. It's just which unique factors of dis-ease do you have that create the state of how you're feeling.
Yeah. And I think from that place too, it makes it easier to understand and kind of better understanding of our bodies. And it's not our bodies aren't broken. It's how can we kind of, and I think that's our hormones aren't broken, or like that conversation that it's like, no, these are the things that are affecting it. So this is where I can elicit the biggest change or provide the most support for.
And the likelihood is, like I had a friend the other day, she sent me this reel on Instagram from a company selling a $50 hormone balancing supplement. And everyone's like, I lost 30 pounds and I took it and my life is amazing. And she's like, do I need this? Should I buy in bulk? Like what's happening? Right. And it's about so much more than that, because it's, again, understanding those foundational pieces.
Yeah. And even when we talk about like PMS or PMDD is like very much in a more significant way, how all of those changes, again, inflammation, immune system, insulin, have such a dramatic impact depending on the hormonal fluctuation of that cycle and how that presents itself. So still working to support those things can create a big change.
So what are your favorite ways to work to support those things? I love, you guys will come to appreciate this on this podcast. I love when my practitioners make generalized statements and I'm like, let's just push that button. I did it with Mary Ellen too. She was like, oh yeah, let's do this. Okay. So walk me through that. What does that support structure look like in terms of what people can expect to think about, look at, treat, all that kind of stuff, with especially PMS and PMDD, because you mentioned those two?
Yeah. Like when we look at blood work, we're always assessing kind of through blood work what your individual hormonal response to food is, or what that individual insulin response to food is, or the insulin demand, or anybody that may be listening that is a patient, that lovely 2-hour test that we send people to the lab for, and assessing for inflammation, assessing for kind of changes to immune system. Specifically, we think about histamine in that second half of the cycle. So when we talk about what does that look like, we're assessing for, okay, is there any supplements that could be helpful for supporting that connection between the immune system and hormonal changes? Do we have to work through either supplements, lifestyle, movement, how to support insulin demand and how to support stable insulin levels and therefore blood sugar levels? What's happening at the level of the nervous system? Are there internal factors that our nervous system's responding to? So is there a gut health component? Is there a gut bug component? And I think that's really validating sometimes for people too, because they very much will identify with external stressors and nervous system changes. And specifically in the context of PMS or PMD, they'll say, I feel things really more intensely in that second part of my cycle. But then kind of bringing it back to, okay, but what is your nervous system dealing with on a day-to-day basis internally, that therefore the bucket's just overflowing as soon as you kind of one thing changes. And we talk about that a lot. So what does that look like? Again, is it changes that we have to make for supporting the bugs in our microbiome or in our gut, essentially. Is there changes to the foods that we have to eat? How do we support that? Kind of our environment too. What are we exposed to on a day-to-day basis? That again, kind of nervous system is kind of starting to fill the bucket. And how do we support that?
Totally. So then what are your favorite ways to look at and consider inflammation and inflammatory responses in the body and that kind of thing? It can be symptoms, it can be labs. So walk me through that.
Yeah, that tends to be, obviously, I'm still learning and evolving, but right now when we're looking for inflammation, we're in particularly blood work, we look at specific markers. So sometimes those are 2 markers called ESR and CRP. But then we also look at someone's iron panel. So we can see changes to an iron profile and whether that's kind of the relationship between iron or ferritin and transferrin that we've learned about and kind of changes there for picking up any other pathways of inflammation. I would say are some of the big ones that we think that like stand out on blood work. And then
inflammation. Inflammation is such an interesting one because what we always say over and over again in practice is that there's so many opportunities for inflammation to come up. Inflammation is literally just your immune system responding appropriately and or inappropriately to its environment. And so when we consider that CRP, C-reactive protein, ESR is called erythrocyte sedimentation rate. These are markers of generalized non-specific inflammation. In 10 years from now, when I ask someone, oh, how are we assessing inflammation? Good God, I hope we have a much more specific answer. But we have to piece together someone's symptoms and general labs. We have to look into, like, for example, iron. This is a conversation we'll have a lot because iron is used by so many inflammatory processes in the body. We think about iron as anemia. It's either high, which is good, or low, which is bad. And if it's low, then you can't carry oxygen, you can't grow hair, you can't grow nails, you're brain foggy, and you hate your life a little bit. That's all we hear about iron out in like general society. But internally, we're like, no, if your iron is high, right? If your ferritin is high, and iron and ferritin are different things, from that space, we're able to get these subtle hints. And when we're dealing in the world of the itty bitty shitty committee, this subtle hint, the thing that other practitioners might blow past and say that's not a big deal, could be literally the inflammatory marker that Lauryn takes and runs with and gets you the results that you're looking for. That's why it's so important to understand the finesse nuances and to understand what we don't understand. And I think that's something that, especially in advanced women's health, I see how you guys practice. We're really good at not pretending we understand what we don't understand. And I think it's so easy to say that, but there are so many practitioners and that look and they say, oh yeah, that's fine, even though they don't understand the nuances of it. So it makes us constantly question if we know enough, right? You saw Lauryn do that there, like in my new sentence, right? But like, you're brilliant, you know a ton, but you're humbled by the fact that we're never going to know it all. And I think that's the sign of a good practitioner, right?
Yes.
You're like, and I'm supposed to toot my own horn here. Beep. Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started. So then transitioning, I would love to know if you had to pick, and I talk about this with a lot of the team. If you had
a supplement?
Oh yeah, so one supplement, that's your fave supplement that you go to all the time, because we've talked to a lot of generalities. What is that supplement? Why do you love to use it? For those of you coming in, we do chart checks.
I feel like you're already going to know what my supplement is.
So we do chart checks internally because we have a standard of care. So me and my clinical leads go through and we check charts of all practitioners, not just new ones, to say, okay, is there any gaps? Is there any opportunities? Is there anything that we need to be looking into? And Lauryn's is it's very easy feedback every time. You're doing a great job and you really love XYZ. So what's your favorite supplement and why do you like to use it?
I may be known for having mitochondrial formula.
So walk us through that. So, because we haven't talked a lot about mitochondria on this podcast so far, and it's actually critical to women's health and hormonal health. So walk us through what that is.
Yeah. So a lot of times when we think about the mitochondria, we always just think of the energy powerhouse of the cell. I think that's drained in our brains from grade 10 biology. So our mitochondria are kind of making cellular energy. But normally when I'm talking to patients, when we talk about the mitochondria, we're also talking about, hey, it makes our hormones. So
including cortisol.
Yeah. So all these things that can impact the health of the mitochondria. Again, we can see changes to hormonal production. We know that it's really important in terms of inflammation. So it can be responsible for, it balances kind of inflammation in the body. So again, if it's not working optimally, we can see significant changes there, or things that affect, whether that's viruses or bugs or different things like that, that affect kind of the mitochondria. Again, we'll see kind of changes with that for how our body regulates inflammation. Outside of that too, oxidative stress, or when we talk about that cellular resting, or that balance of antioxidants and pro-oxidants, mitochondria is really important for that. So it kind of is really foundational to a lot of things. And we know it can be really sensitive to other things happening. Therefore, its function becomes affected, or it can be kind of at the forefront of impacting other things kind of downhill too. So
it's the ultimate loop of dysfunction, right? It's like, it's affected by everything. It's so sensitive. And for anyone wondering what those symptoms look like in your body, it's like that aging. You feel tired. You feel like your loss of vitality. Your hormones are sensitive to everything. Your nervous system is sensitive to everything. This can come back to that mitochondrial axis.
Yeah. And in the fertility world too, we talk about it a lot in terms of like our eggs or those oocytes being where so many mitochondria are focused. So we can see really significant changes at the level of kind of the oocyte and egg quality when there's changes to the mitochondria and endoplasmic reticulum, which you talk a little bit about too, which is the another organelle within the cell that also impacts hormone production. But those guys, so we have a supplement at the clinic. It's a powder, which is really nice for people that don't love taking capsules. But a lot of times I am known to recommend this powder when I feel mitochondria is involved. Yeah. And it has a lot of the ingredients that help to kind of support mitochondrial health. And whether that's in the form of energy production, whether that's in the form of certain antioxidants that are involved with the health of the mitochondria, it's kind of all those different ingredients in one.
So cool. Love it. Yeah. I think I had this on last time too. I'm predictable. I am very predictable. I have it in my bottle right now. I read the brand. So to wrap up, I would love to know what's one piece, what is like one take home that you really wish everyone knew about their bodies? Because we talked about so many things, as we always do on these intro podcasts, right? We've talked about hormones, we've talked about mitochondria, we've talked about the immune system. But what's one aspect of women's health that you just really wish every woman knew about their bodies and could take home from today?
I think to trust your body, I think is where I have a lot of conversations around that, and just trusting what you're feeling and when you feel things are off. Because a lot of times I'll have women in my office that are kind of downplaying or being like, oh, well, it's just because of this, or it's just because of this. And they kind of brush the symptoms off, and I'll kind of be like, no, like those are all pieces to the puzzle that give us a bigger story about why you're feeling the way you feel. And you're brushing them off because somewhere along that story, someone has told you that it's not important, that it's not, X, Y, and Z. And it's just because, you have a lot going on, or you're working a lot, or you're a mom, or you're this or you're that. But intuitively, you're okay, no, but I shouldn't feel this way. And we downplay that. So then when we're in an interaction with a practitioner and we're having that assessment, it's easy to kind of brush up and be like, yeah, but it's because of this, it's because of that, because of this. And I think those are all really important parts to kind of just embrace and intuitively know, like, your body best, you live in it every day, to kind of be like, hey, what's the bigger story that this is telling us about what's going on in my body?
I see this to patients all the time, is we need to understand right now that like our societal standard is not good. It's eroding. It's eroded over the last few years. So what happens is everyone is normalizing themselves compared to someone else's pain. So the person who in front of you says, it's not a big deal, it's because they feel like that too. and they were told by someone, it's not a big deal. So if we want to turn this over, if we want to turn the tides and say, and take a stand for women feeling at their best, feeling the health that they have the potential of feeling, which healthy women are dangerous. Like, they are dangerous. And I am not going to get political right now, but I think from that standpoint, if women just put their feet in the sand and say, no, I'm not standing for this anymore, and say, when someone says to you, oh, no, I feel like everyone feels like that. It's like, you don't have to. Even that conversation that we're having in our offices, I then see patients go tell their friends, well, you don't have to. And then they go tell their coworker, well, you don't have to. And so the tide is going to turn. It's not turning yet. It's going to turn though. And I think is stepping into that trust is the first step of that. And I couldn't agree more. I'm so passionate about that.
Yeah. And I think it's being surrounded by like-minded practitioners and like a team that all feels that it lights you up too. Like on team calls, everyone's like, yeah. And just like, So it's a really fun environment to be surrounded with too. And I think that's the other thing that's really cool about our team too, is like when someone books with us, they think it's just us, but then behind the scenes, like we really are always collaborating and picking each other's brains to get the best care possible for that person. It's just really cool.
Amazing. So for anyone who wants to book, you guys can book with Dr. Lauryn through Advanced Women's Health Kingston. All of the links will be below as well. But thank you so much for coming on and being your bubbly self. I think it's so important that you get matched with a practitioner and their personality that brings out the best in yours. So I'm sure everyone is super excited and you can book below. So thanks so much, Lauryn, and we'll talk to you guys soon. Have a good one.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message. And that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.